Yo, what's checking, everybody? We're back. It's Geoff and Anwar. It is the Orange Bloods Texas football channel. We're talking quarterbacks today. We are 12, I'm doing the math, 11 days.
Oh, snap.
11 days away from the season opener against Louisiana. And Anwar, technically, by the way, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz. Anwar, technically, Texas still doesn't have a starting quarterback, even if we've talked about the position in the last week and a half as a bit of a transition of who's getting reps, who's taking the ones, all of that stuff has changed throughout camp, but the bottom line still remains the same.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Ketch, because I thought, potentially we could hear something as early as Monday. So I checked in with my sources as of Monday night to see has anything been said. And as of Monday night, I was told that nothing had been announced or at least communicated to the quarterback. So we're kind of still in this holding pattern where Sarkisian is trying to decide, like, what's he going to do? Is it Hudson? Is it Casey Thompson? Ketch, I've got to believe, if he's starting Louisiana prep by Wednesday of this week, as we record this thing on a Tuesday morning, I've got to believe we're getting closer to knowing who the person is. I find it hard to believe, Ketch, that we'll get past Wednesday and not know who the guy is. I feel like it's coming soon. But I will say this, it speaks to the quality of quarterback play that I think that Sarkisian has seen, that Texas fans can finally say they've experienced, where it seems to be a tough decision. Like, it doesn't seem to be something that is a slam dunk. And Ketch, your reporting has kind of reflected that. My reporting has reflected that. Even though we may be on different sides of the spectrum of who we think should start, we both agree both guys are good and both guys are capable of having some sort of success this season. What that means, we'll have to figure out. But, it speaks to at least saying that, hey, there were two quality quarterbacks battling for a job, and Sarkisian has had like a little bit of he's got some figuring out to do.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, as much of a Hudson Card fan as I am, and so much of that centers around what I think his long-term upside as a player is, I'm sure that, my position that I don't know that who the quarterback is this year changes the one-loss record a whole lot. I think it's an indication of how close the quarterback battle is. I mean, Texas is staring down the barrel of a 9-3, 8-4 gun, regardless of who I think ends up being named quarterback. And so much of this season, whether Texas fans want to hear this or not, so much of this season for me is about, when we get to the end of the year, what's the story of this team? Is it they're playing their best football at the end of the year, and now they've got their own returning starting quarterback, and this is where next year is not a reload or a relaunch. It's this year serves as a springboard, if you will. And maybe that's the word. Maybe this thing isn't a relaunch or a rebuild. Maybe what 2021 really is a springboard, because there's just no way for me to look towards 2022 and not see a better looking program and team and situation on offense than I would this year. But in the here and now, it makes making a decision, I think, really tricky. And I think what's really interesting is I thought we would, in talking to the players and in talking to sources around the program, I thought there would be an official line like, hey, we don't really care who starts. And I thought that there would be a vibe behind the scenes that there's a group that wants one player more so than another. The offensive guys want a certain guy. And I haven't sensed that. I mean, it really does seem genuine when you hear people say it either doesn't matter to them who starts or they feel comfortable with both guys. I think it speaks to the lack of separation, but also that both guys are quality.
No, I would 100% agree with that. I think, Ketch, you and I probably go into the season saying, and we're looking at the landscape of the Big 12, we would say Spencer Rattler's number one, Brock Purdy's number two, and whoever gets the starting job for Texas is probably number 3. Like, is that it? Would you go in that quarterback ranking?
Should be.
So, it's not like we say, oh, Hudson's you would be number 3, but Casey would be number 7, know, or vice versa, right? Yep. We still say whoever that person is, it's still plug and play. I want to ask you this, Ketch. Are you still under the belief as we get closer that the running back play, if I'm telling you that Bijan is going to get 20 plus touches, he may be in that 20 to 25 range, potentially 30 in some games. Does it alter your vision of what the season looks like at all? Or is it still for you, hey, it's still going to be about the quarterback play? I've seen D'Onta Foreman rush for 2,000 yards. No matter what Bijan does, it's not going to have any effect. It's all about this season still goes on the quarterback.
I think there are some individual games where if you tell me that Bijan, look, let's say Bijan has a 1,500-yard season, right? And he's touching the ball 20 times per game. His median performance is going to be like 110, 120 yards, whatever it would be on a 1,500-yard kind of pace. But, that might mean that 250 of it come against Rice. And then, that in order for that median to be the median, there's going to be some games in there where it's not 250. So I think that if you could tell me in advance, hey, here's what Bijan does against Oklahoma. 21 touches, 185 yards, 2 touchdowns. It might make me think about that game like, But weirdly, I'm still going to ask what the quarterback performance looks like in every game. And consequently, in every game, if you give me the quarterback performance, I don't need the running backs. You tell me how the quarterbacks do in every game, and I don't care how Bijan does. But if you tell me how Bijan does, I'm always going to have questions about what did it look like with the quarterbacks. That's just how important they are. And, I think the D'Onta Foreman example is such a good one because he had so many huge games, and it didn't make for a hill of beans when your quarterback position, which on that team was dreadful. It can't make up for that. Now, if you just tell me going in that Texas is going to have really good but not great quarterback play all year long, that's a hell of a lot better than what D'Onta Foreman had to work with. So if you just go generic, really good plus Bijan, now we're at that 9-3 mark, and it's like, how good is really good? Because it'll be the difference between 10 wins if they could get that high.
It's interesting. I don't want to give Texas fans, too much of deja vu and pissing everyone's Cheerios. But your D'Onta Foreman is really interesting because that Kansas loss, I looked it up. He had 51 carries for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. That was the game where you was like, this guy's never coming back.
Yes.
You proclaimed like that guy is never coming back. But in that game, Shane completed 17 of 26 for $165, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. So
there you go.
To your point, in a game where a guy rushes for 250 yards, the quarterback threw 3 interceptions, and that was the ball game. So
that was the number, because you were reading the numbers out, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's like I was just about to say Bouchel was pretty okay. Like they should have won that game, and then you say the 3, and it changes the landscape of everything.
Everything, right? And so I'm with you that the quarterback play, whereas beforehand, I was like, come on, Ketch. Like, it's Bijan could rush for 2,000. And then I'm like, well, you're right. D'Onta rushed for 2,000. So I have to give it to you on that argument. Even though we may argue about Babyface and Keith Sweat, I have to agree with you on that one. That those points are incredibly valid.
But I kind of came back around and agreed with you on Babyface.
Yes, you did.
When it was all said and done.
To your credit.
Look at us.
All right. As we stand here on Tuesday as we record, and this is before me, it may be Tuesday afternoon. This thing may be outdated because we may know like in a few hours. are you still standing on Hudson Card being named the starter? Has anything swayed you at all to make you think Casey may get the job?
It has been my contention that all of the signs right now, forget about us logically trying to talk about what makes sense from a, do you want to lose your depth? Do you want to risk? We focus on what we've seen in the month of August primarily. Is there a single sign that Casey Thompson's headed towards a first team announcement? Because I feel like they exist for Hudson. We've talked about them. Have we left anything unsaid? Is there one thing that we can point to where we would say, oh, this is a good sign that Casey's now back in a position to be the guy?
What I would say is Casey has been the first team guy from winter up until maybe last week. And so I don't know if last week is the thing that teeters it off. But if you say one thing, I would say one guy has been rolling with the ones for the past 8 months outside of some practices last week. That would be the only thing, is he's been the number one guy the entire time.
And I would have, before the change was made, you and I both would have pointed to that and said, that's the biggest sign that Casey Thompson was still in a position to be the starter, because they were treating him like a starter. But when I talk about things that have happened in the month of August, I feel like it's a sign that Hudson Card will be the starter. And they still have rotated reps, but over the course of the last 8 days, Hudson Card's taken the majority of the reps, even if they split it up in the scrimmage in a way that it seemed more 50-50-ish than what they've been previously doing. I don't know of that sign's been eliminated, now is in Hudson's favor. If it changed, if we find out on Tuesday's practice that Casey now has reflipped roles and now he's the guy first in line with the ones, I would take that as a monumental sign. I would think that it might not be checkmate, but it's check, because Sark's made the move. He's made a change. The next change, if there is one, is the final change. Like, he's not going to Mickey Mouse this thing around where the players don't know who should be taking the one. The players, I think, can make sense of what's happened so far. If there are more changes, I think you run the risk of players asking, what are we doing? And so that's what I would be waiting to see. Does Thompson get a reflip? If he does, huge. If he doesn't, yeah, I'm still team Hudson Card. The momentum is in his favor right now.
Last thing I'll say is I'll stay on the Casey Thompson thing, and we'll learn pretty soon. I just think if you're Sark and you open the season against Louisiana, I just think you've got to say, all right, I want someone who's had some sort of playing time. Like, if you tell me you opening the season against Rice, if it was Rice, Arkansas, Louisiana, you can build up to it. Okay, maybe. But I just think at the end of the day, you've got to say, hey, give me a guy who's seen some sort of fire. He's not like he's seen a ton, but that's going to be some fire. I know some people say we're overcooking, the grits a little bit with Louisiana. I don't think we are. I think we're trying to kind of sound the alarm, and people tell, oh, you're overhyping them and they're blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if there's overhype.
They're a good, legitimate top 25 team. Like,
yeah.
Nothing more, but nothing less either.
Correct. They're not, Oklahoma. They're not Alabama. They're not Ohio State. But to your point, they're top 25. They're good. It's a season opener. And I just think for my money, I want a guy who's been there, who has a little bit of veteran presence, a veteran leadership. I want that guy, especially if things start going wrong in the huddle, because I think there's going to be some points when things start to go wrong. I want to have someone who's, even though Sark says I don't need a vocal leader, I think you might need a vocal leader in that game. So that's the guy I would go with. But if I'm wrong, then we'll have to defer to Sark and see what and trust his quarterback expertise. But for me, I'm still going to stay with Casey until proven otherwise.
I agree with you. And I think that I would 100% agree with you. This will be my last comment because I know I'm looking at the clock. I know we got to wrap it up. In a normal world, I think you're exactly right. I just happen to think the game has been rigged in advance, kind of in my position from the very beginning. There's a desire from people in the building that were previously in the building, people that keep going in the building want to see what Hudson Card can do. And I think that because we look back on it, what's happened? The quarterbacks had a push in the first scrimmage, and they essentially had a push in the second scrimmage. So Thompson hasn't lost, but yet I get the sense that he's losing. And it's because I think the game is somewhat rigged. There's a perception of what Hudson Card can be, and Casey Thompson almost has to be better significantly than Hudson to offset this thing. It kind of reminds me of this show, A Different World, where I would watch that show, and no matter what other female was around Jasmine Guy, she still was like the one. Like, I remember Cree Summer being one of the characters that I kind of had a crush on back in the day on that show. Mm-hmm. But like, no matter how cute she was, all the dudes always looked at Whitney, right? Like she was the star of that show. And I view this in a somewhat similar way. I feel like Hudson Card, unless outperformed by Thompson, which just hasn't happened. I think the tie, if in baseball it's tie goes to the runner, I think in this it's always been tie goes to Hudson. And I don't know if it's a tie, but it feels very close to a tie. And like I said, I don't know how fair it is. I just think it's the world that we live in. Look, we're up against it. We could do like another 45 minutes just on this topic alone. For myself and Anwar Richardson, do us a solid, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we will do this again tomorrow. It might be a special buy or sell edition of the OB Texas football show. So don't you guys go anywhere. We'll be right back tomorrow. Later.